Europa and the Pirate Twins on Revenge of the 80s Radio, one of Thomas Dolby's first hits from his album The Golden Age of Wireless. Thomas Dolby is my guest right here on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Thomas, you scored a lot of hits in the UK, and we talked about the breakthrough in the US with She Blinded Me with Science. But talk about your overall music philosophy at the time. What made a real Thomas Dolby song that you would have been proud to put on an album?
Yeah, it's interesting you should ask that, because there are very few songs that I didn't put on albums. There's very little wastage. I mean, I've made 5 solo albums in my career, and I couldn't put together a whole album of outtakes or B-sides. If a song is good enough, it's good enough to go on my album. If it's not good enough, then I don't even finish the song. So in terms of my philosophy, I really am a perfectionist. I expect the song composition and the vocal and the lyrics and the arrangement to all hold together as a single concept. Each one of them is a little movie, really, sort of running in my imagination. And so there's a very strong concept running through my songs. There are some continuous elements that crop up more than once in my songs. For example, Europa and the Pirate Twins in 1980 had a sequel in 1990 called Eastern Bloc. There's a character called Caroline that crops up in a couple of different songs, including one on the new album. And it's been pointed out that the word spam tin appears in more than one of my songs. So there is a definite continuity to my stuff. And I think that is one of the things that attracts fans to it, is that you always expect something different musical flavors, different musical idioms in my songs. And I'm on an ongoing adventure in music.
I need to tell you this, Thomas. I actually liked the Howard the Duck movie. It was a great parody of musical romantic comedies of the time. Your music also brought a real credibility to the table, though. They could have used the regular generic type tracks that other movies of the time used to manufacture a pop hit soundtrack, but they didn't. How did you get involved with that project?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a bit of a cult movie, Howard the Duck. It was very famous at the time for coming and going in a weekend, in spite of the fact that a lot of money was spent on it. A lot of fun was poked at George Lucas, who up till that point had mainly massive box office successes, but he'd finally got his comeuppance. And a lot of that was overblown and unfair. I think the movie has got a lot of merit to it. Unfortunately, the duck character itself didn't work out too well and was not as sort of punky and irreverent as the cartoon character that Howard was based on. But I was invited directly by George Lucas to take part in the movie, and I was originally going to do a full score, but they ended up having me train the band, the 4-piece girl band in the movie, headed by Leah Thompson. I trained those actresses to look like a band and wrote and recorded songs for them, with a little help from various friends, including George Clinton.
So what was it like training Leah Thompson and actresses to sing?
I had a great time training Leah and the other actresses on the show to sing. They didn't really play instruments before they came onto the show, and they tried initially to sort of mime to their instruments, and they had a choreographer do their steps. And we came to realize that it's impossible to use choreography to make actors look like musicians. The only way to make them look like musicians is for them to actually learn the parts. So I ended up training each of them. I brought in my own band from the UK and put them one-on-one with the actors to teach them the parts well enough that they could do a decent job of miming to them in the movie.
With me is Thomas Dolby. He is my guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Thomas, between the 80s and today, you produced and collaborated with a variety of artists, put together soundtracks, and worked with an array of musical genres. Talk about your evolution as a musician and producer over the years, Thomas.
Well, I'm not an indigenous musician. I don't have one particular style of music that I grew up around that I'm well versed in. I'm pretty much a dilettante in lots of different musical styles. And amusingly, there's about 30 Father Christmases walking past me on the sidewalk right now. But I love lots of different styles of music. Very often, I'm frustrated enough with a style of music that I will write a song which kind of fixes it for me. For example, I know very little about bluegrass music, but there is a sort of bluegrass techno mashup on my new album called The Toad Lickers. So I like to use whatever musical flavor or idiom is appropriate to help me tell a story. And so people who are fans of my music know that from one album to the next, there's no single style that I'm going to be focused on. In a way, the times have caught up with me, because I think a lot of people on their iPod have an eclectic music collection now, and they put it in shuffle mode, and so they're used to hearing, a bluegrass song go right into a techno song, and it doesn't jar. And so in a way, one of my albums that flits around between different styles is very appropriate for the age that we live in.
It's a very interesting combination of music you have in that new album, A Map of the Floating City, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments. But I did want to ask you, because you were involved in so many collaborations and projects, I want to know if there is one or two that made even Thomas Dolby sit back and say, wow, now that is amazing.
Well, I suppose the highlights really would have been playing with Roger Waters in The Wall in Berlin in 1990, which was a fantastic experience. I was suspended 60 feet up the wall, wearing a suit with 15-foot-long arms and legs, playing the teacher. So I was therefore screaming at the top of my voice in my best Scottish accent. Another one would have been working at Live Aid in '85 with David Bowie. I got a call only 8 days before the concert from Bowie himself, saying that he was in a hurry to put a band together because his own band were unavailable. And could I help assemble something and rehearse them up? And Bowie himself was busy working on a movie at the time, and so he kept changing his mind about the songs that he was going to do. And I flew into Wembley Stadium with him in a helicopter, and 2 minutes later we were on stage, and I was playing the piano intro to TBC-15. We also went through Rebel Rebel and Modern Love and finished up with Heroes. And the band had not played those four songs back to back ever. We all knew them because we'd grown up with them. Bowie was like the anthem of our teenage years, and so we all knew them instinctively, but we'd never actually rehearsed them. And we went out on stage and played them in front of 90,000 people in the stadium and a TV audience of about 1.5 billion.
I could see that being one of the most amazing projects, yes. Thomas, you also found a way to battle music piracy. Your rich music format not only found a more convenient way for musicians to store high-quality files while using less disk space, it evolved with your Headspace company that you established, later of course named Beatnik, into giving musicians and producers the ability to watermark their files to suppress illegal copying and sharing. Talk about how you developed that.
Well, it was a brand new file format that we created for rapid downloading over the web. And the idea of it was not to stream music as with MP3 and Real Audio and so on. The idea of it was to enable web pages to have sonified user interfaces, so that when you clicked on a button or moused over a graphic, you could hear a sound associated with it without slowing down the time that it took to download the page. Throughout the later part of the 90s, we were very successful with that from a point of view of numbers of downloads and the popularity of it, and we made absolutely no money whatsoever, because most web content people expected to get for free, and so there was really no business model around it. We probably would have gone up in smoke. Beatnik probably would have disappeared like so many other startups, were it not for the fact that the very small music synthesizer which we created, the Beatnik Synth, was licensed by Nokia, the world's largest mobile phone maker, at the end of the 90s, and embedded in their phones, and has been in every one of the phones that Nokia and most of their competitors have made since about 1999. And so Beatnik at this point has shipped about 2.5 to 3 billion units. We're not quite sure.
Thomas, your new album is called A Map of the Floating City. To longtime fans, it's noticeably different from your most famous fare of the past. Now, we discussed a little bit of that, but talk about what you wanted to do with this new album.
When I set about making A Map of the Floating City, which is my first new album in 20 years, I had a lot of catching up to do. I had some great songs which I'd written while driving my car or in the shower or walking along the beach near my home. And I was asking a lot of the audience, because although I have a very hardcore, loyal following that have stuck with me since the 80s and early 90s, a lot of the music fans under the age of about 40 would never have heard of me. And so I needed to reach out to a new audience, and reintroduce my music to them while not alienating the fans that have stuck with me through thick and thin. And so it was very important to me that this should be a highly personal album, one that didn't sound like anybody else, one that made no sacrifices or compromises in terms of getting on the radio or getting in the charts or any of that. And I don't know if it's going to be another 20 years before I make another album, but I'm certainly not a prolific music maker. So it was important also that this was an album that, if I had to live with it for a few years, would be one that I could be truly proud of.
We're going to play a couple of tracks from the album A Map of the Floating City and talk more about them in just a few moments. Straight ahead, more with Thomas Dolby, our guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio.